Welcome into Strictly Speaking. So, we're in a different world right now when it comes to politics, when it comes to national policy, when it comes to the federal government. What do we mean? We're talking about Donald Trump's world because Donald Trump came in swinging a massive sword. He is slashing and slicing and dicing the federal government, slicing spending, slicing agencies, and so on and so forth. And the question is how much authority and how much legal authority does a president have? Does an executive get to overrule all of the other branches we're supposed to have, right? A balance of power, or technically it's referred to as a separation of powers. Can the president continue to do what this president is doing? Well, we need to tap into some expertise to find that out. Paul Kamenar is a Washington, D.C. public policy and appellate attorney who counsels clients on legal, regulatory, and public policy matters. He's a senior fellow of the Administrative Conference of the United States, and he guest lectures at the U.S. Naval Academy on national security law. He's also briefed members of Congress and their staff on overcriminalization issues, along with representatives from the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Heritage Foundation. He's now counsel for the National Legal and Policy Center, and today he'll take us through what's legal and what's not in the rapidly changing world of DC politics and government policy in the age of Trump 47, right here on Strictly Speaking. Paul Kamenar, so good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on Strictly Speaking. How are you?
Hey, my pleasure, Bob. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you too. And so this is kind of fun. For those who don't know, Strictly Speaking is recorded here in glorious Cleveland, Ohio. And it's not often that I get local boy, returns conquering hero. But you're a Northeast Ohio native yourself, right, Paul?
That's right. I'm from Barberton, just down the road from Cleveland. I grew up there. I went to Barberton High School, and I have six brothers and sisters. Half of them are still in the Barberton, Akron area, and they're avid listeners of your morning show.
Wow, that's very nice to hear. That's fantastic. As a matter of fact, I was going to ask you about this, but I decided not to until you just brought it up. I get email from time to time from Joseph.
Yeah,
Is,
my
is,
brother
is
Joe.
it
Yeah,
true?
he's one of your biggest fans.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, because he
Yeah,
does. He's a very good guy,
yeah,
at
he
least
lives
from what
in.
I can tell from his emails. Yeah, he's got a lot of
Right,
great
right.
stuff.
Yeah,
Well, we were kind of joking before we got started. You were a Barberton Magic, right?
yeah.
The Barberton mascot is the Magics, not the Magic like the Orlando Magic basketball team,
Right,
right?
right.
Magics.
Well, it's called the Magic City. Yeah, and so the Barberton Magic's football team, our school newspaper was the Magician, but there's a lot of magic there for sure.
I remember the reason I'm joking about it is because I asked you before if you were a magic or a magician as an individual. When Shaquille O'Neal went to play for the Miami Heat, he was once talking about being a member of the Heat. Somebody said, "What does that make you?" And he said, "I guess I'm a Haitian." So,
Either
so I
that
didn't
or a
know what. So
heater.
yeah, or heater. There you go. So anyway, so good to have you,
Yep.
Paul. And obviously, you are indeed local boy made good. Are doing some amazing things, and you have some incredible experiences we want to talk about. But I want to really tap into again, as I said, your expertise on so many of the things that are going on right now. And I guess the biggest issue or concern that a lot of people have right now is the legal authority for President Trump to give a private citizen, an unelected advisor, if you will, whose name happens to be Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, to give him the keys essentially to every agency in government that he and his team of four crack code writers and algorithm writers and so on and so forth, the ability to get into virtually all of the government agencies to find out where the waste is. Now, I think most Americans have been saying for decades and decades, we've got to stop spending so much money. How much money are we spending that is of service to the American people, and how much of it is wasteful and unnecessary? How much of it is foreign and so forth? So it looks to me like what President Trump is doing is what the people want him to do. But Paul, the question is how legal is what he is doing? The left is screaming that this unelected, instigator, Elon Musk doesn't have and should not have the authority to get into all of these government systems. So, from a legal standpoint, what
No.
say you?
Well, you know, 99% of our government officers are not elected. We did elect Donald Trump, and under the Constitution, he has the power to appoint inferior officers, or in this case, what's called a special government employee, SGEs, as we call them. And they're authorized for, under the law, up to 130 days to be acting in that capacity. Every administration has used SGEs, whether it was Obama, Biden, Clinton, you name it. So here you have Elon Musk, who is doing the things that Donald Trump was elected to do. Of course, Donald Trump can't spend time going into the bowels of the Treasury and USAID, so he has employees do that. And of course, Elon Musk is probably the best person to do that because he knows how to get to the wasteful spending. He knows how to cut through the bureaucratic mess that's there. And as we can see, it's amazing all the stuff he's uncovering. I mean, the waste and the fraud is just unbelievable. Now, what's happening, of course, is the liberals are completely upset that, oh my God, somebody's opening up the closet here and seeing all our skeletons there, and we don't want that to happen. So they filed a flurry of lawsuits in courts all around the country, favorable courts for their purposes. So it's kind of like a forum shopping. And at this point in time, a lot of the activities that Musk has been doing has sort of been put on hold. One court said, "Well, you can't go into the Treasury and tap into the levers of all the money that we're spending, but the unelected bureaucrats who've been there for years, they can do it. They can have the keys to the Treasury, but you, under the authority of the president, so not even the Secretary of the Treasurer, who was confirmed by the Senate, can go into his own office, the Treasury, and say, "Hey, how are we spending all this money?" I mean, it's ridiculous what's going on in the courts. So, with respect to Elon Musk, these cases are putting him on sort of a temporary hold. There's going to be further arguments in the next few days, the next week or two, to resolve whether these injunctions should stay on or whether they can be lifted. But eventually, Bob, these cases are going to go to the Court of Appeals and ultimately the Supreme Court. But this is just one case out of dozens that the left is coming after Donald Trump in
Well,
the
it's
court.
actually one after another because
Oh
they're
yeah.
you know they're trying to stop him with several injunctions. How many federal judges are there? Ballpark?
Oh gosh, you got me there. Well, let's see. At least a couple thousand. I
Thousand?
mean,
Thousand or so? Okay.
well,
The
yeah,
reason I ask it's a
right,
lot.
because you,
The point.
yeah, because you have district court judges, we have courts of appeals judges, then of course the Supreme Court. So I would say the numbers in the thousands of you add them all up together. So
Okay.
what happens here is that the left does what we call forum shopping. So, for example, and we could talk about, for example, the birthright citizenship issue. They went to some judge in Washington, they went to some judge in Boston to get an injunction on having this executive order put on hold. But again, those will eventually go up to their respective courts of appeals and then eventually to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of judges out there, and a lot of them are good, a lot of them are partisan, but there's the good ones and the bad ones. So just a matter of finally getting these cases through the court system.
Yeah, you called it forum shopping, and I just have heard it phrased as judge shopping. And the reason I asked how
Yeah,
many there are is because is that how the system is supposed to work, in your opinion? That somebody who doesn't like what a president is doing, exercising his executive authority. So they're going to judge shop from among thousands of federal judges, at least a thousand, probably thousands, plural, to
yeah,
find one who will give them the ruling they want, which is an injunction to slow this thing down. Now, President Trump knows that some of these are bound for the courts. For example, he knew birthright citizenship was going to be challenged immediately. It's
right,
why he made the order so that it would
right,
get into the courts, so that he could get this thing rolling to
yep,
eventually get a favorable ruling to end the practice of birthright citizenship. But in some of these other things, and we'll come back to that. I want to stay on
sure,
Doge spending and so forth.
sure,
Trying to find a judge to stop Elon Musk in his tracks from accessing Treasury or accessing education or accessing the Pentagon or whatever the case might be,
Right.
knowing he's on borrowed time in terms of the limited time that this person can be serving in the appointed role, they delay this thing, delay, and all they've got to do is find one judge in one district who can rule and enjoin the entire process for the entire country. Is that how it's supposed to work?
Well, no, that's how it's supposed to work, but because of the way the court rules are promulgated, it does allow some judges to issue what are called nationwide injunctions, meaning that even though the case is brought in one locality, like the state of Washington, the judge there said, I hereby declare that this executive order is illegal, and I hereby declare that it's illegal throughout the whole country. Normally, what happens when there's cases brought challenging government regulations, those regulations are only struck down if they are in that particular jurisdiction. And what you have normally is different courts litigating these cases. You might have one jurisdiction saying, no, I think it is okay. And another one says, no, I think it's unconstitutional. And because of this split in jurisdictions, that's the reason why the Supreme Court ultimately hears these cases. And in fact, that's one of the grounds that they have the authority to review lower court cases because there's a split in the circuits and the Supreme Court, which is the final arbiter of all this, makes sense of, okay, here's what the national rule should be. But you're right. It is a basically abuse of the court process to have these what we call nationwide injunctions. There are some proposals kicking around on how to correct that by changing Rule 65 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure by having perhaps a lottery system where if these suits are brought all around the country, that they go to one court system and the court then says, okay, we're going to pick who's going to decide the case. That way, you can't pick your favorite judge to rule on it. But I got to admit, though, Bob, it does sort of work the other way too, because you have some conservatives when they're bringing their challenges go down to favorable courts in Texas when they're challenging some of the Biden executive orders. So it can cut both ways.
Yeah, it can, and I get that. But what's really frustrating to me is when somebody like Vice President JD Vance puts out a tweet that says judges are not allowed to control the executive branch's authority. Judges are not allowed to, or should not be allowed to tell, commander in chief how he should, run the military and how he should protect the nation and so on and so forth. So he made a statement about this, and immediately was jumped on by his Democratic opponents and President Trump's Democratic opponents said, "What? You're telling me that the executives don't have to follow what the courts say? We have a a branch system of government in which they are all equally balanced and so on and so forth. How dare you?" And I'm thinking, wasn't it just literally 3 months ago one of the last acts Joe Biden made before he left office was to continue his policy of ignoring the Supreme Court on student loans? The Supreme Court told him directly it is unconstitutional for you to forgive all of these billions of dollars collectively of student loans. And he did it, I want to say, 6, 7 more times after the court told him he couldn't. And they were just fine with that.
Yeah, well, to be fair, what he tried to do is circumvent the Supreme Court ruling by finding yet another way to forgive the student loans. So he was trying to use some loopholes in the decision. But to get back to your earlier point about J.D. Vance's tweet, he made it clear that, of course, the courts cannot dictate to the president how to conduct military affairs. They can't say, "Hey, you can't, have a army division go over here instead of this area," and micromanage the military. And he just used that example to show that the president does have very vast powers. Now, when he said about the executive power, he said the courts cannot stop the president's legitimate executive power. He didn't say that they can't stop illegitimate or unconstitutional exercise of his power. So the left is leaving out that word he did use, and it's just basically a truism. Courts cannot, micromanage or stifle the president's legitimate exercise of his executive power. So all these cases are all about a couple of dozen of them, is are these legitimate exercises of presidential power? And we're going to find out. And I think in many cases they are. We can get into some of those examples.
Yeah, the exact language. I'm glad you brought up the part about legitimate versus
Right.
illegitimate. The exact language of the tweet from JD Vance from February 9th is if a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general in how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also legal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. So
Right.
there's nothing in that tweet that is wrong, is it? Is there?
No, it's basically a truism,
Yeah.
absolutely true. Uh, we'll see how these cases play out.
Yeah, clearly. And, I guess this is the part of it. Now we can maybe move into one of the other specific issues in which they got an injunction. And in fact, three different federal judges said that President Trump cannot unilaterally, by executive order, end birthright citizenship. First of all, what does the amendment say about birthright citizenship? And just to give people a history lesson, talk about why that came about, what it was originally intended to do.
Sure. The birthright citizenship executive order states two classes of situations where birthright citizenship is not permitted. One, where the baby or child is born of illegal aliens that are here in this country. And two, those who are engaging in what's called birthright tourism, where they get a tourist visa when the woman's pregnant, coming over here, knowing full well by when she lands, she's going to have her baby, and then go back to her country and go, great, my child's now a U.S. citizen. I can get all the benefits of citizenship, you name it, passport, Social Security, whatever. And so what Donald Trump did was saying, no, that's not the way the Constitution was intended. So, what the Constitution says, and it's very simple, you go to the 14th Amendment clause, it says, all citizens, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the states in which they reside. Now, the left has been saying over the years that, if you're born in the United States, bingo, full stop, you're a citizen, but they don't look at that qualifying phrase, quote, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, end quote. What does that mean? Well, if you go back to the constitutional history of the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, we all know was enacted by Congress after the Dred Scott decision, which said that slaves were not citizens, that they were mere property, etc. The Congress said we got to correct that decision, and they did first do that by a statute, the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which said that all persons born in the United States and not subject to a foreign power are citizens. So right after that, they had the constitutional amendment, and they basically just wanted to constitutionalize what their statute said. So what is subject to the jurisdiction thereof? It doesn't simply mean that if you're an illegal alien and you commit a crime, that you're not subject to the jurisdiction in terms of being criminally prosecuted. Of course you are. You're subject to the territorial jurisdiction. But the question is, are you subject to the complete jurisdiction as a political matter, allegiance to the United States? And in that regard, the argument is no, you're not if you're an illegal alien or if you're a tourist having your baby there. And there's examples that clearly show that the argument that the left is propounding is simply wrong. They say, oh, if you're born here, bingo, as soon as the baby's born, boom, you're a U.S. citizen. First of all, ambassadors from foreign countries, if the woman is pregnant and has a baby here and is born here, that baby's not a citizen of the United States. Why? Because they owe their allegiance to the foreign country that they came from, not the United States. Here's another example. American Indians. Surely they're citizens of the United States. They were born here. They were here before we were, right? Wrong. Because it took until 1924 for Congress to pass the Indian Citizenship Act to make Indians citizens of the United States. Why? Because those Indians owed their allegiance to their quasi sovereign Indian tribe, not to the United States. So now, if you see it in that lens, you could say, well, now that's starting to make sense. Yeah, why should a woman who's from a foreign country, from Italy, Spain, come over here for a visit? Um, the boat docks in Miami. She gets off the boat, has a baby, gets back on, goes to her country. She doesn't owe her allegiance to the United States. So that child should not be considered a citizen of the United States. So you have a couple judges so far say, oh, this is blatantly unconstitutional. And they never really looked at that phrase, quote, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, or the historical constitutional history of that. And now the government, the Justice Department, will be now making their arguments. And so you're going to have these arguments being made in the next coming weeks. And I dare say the Court of Appeals may have a different view on this. And I think the Supreme Court as well will. Now, I can get a little more deeper in the constitutional cases, but the one that the left keeps citing is this 1898 case, which was a Chinese person was born in the United States. His parents lived here, resided here. They had a business. He was like 21. He goes back to China to visit some old relatives that he never saw, comes back to San Francisco. They said, sorry, you can't come in here. You're not a citizen of the United States. He goes, what do you mean? My parents live here. They reside here. I've lived here for 20 some years. I was born here. And at that time, we had what was called the Chinese Exclusion Acts. These were laws that Congress passed to keep out cheap Chinese labor from coming in and taking over jobs that U.S. Americans should have. And that went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court was careful to look at the facts of that case. And if you look at it carefully, they didn't say, oh, anybody born in the United States is automatically a citizen. No, they looked at that case where his parents were basically domiciled here, they were residents here, and in that narrow example, they said that this their child had been here for many years was a citizen. So that's the only case that they rely on. But I think once this gets to the Supreme Court, I think the Supreme Court will have a different view of that because this court, especially, is very much concerned about constitutional history, about originalism, and so forth. So that's how it's going to play out, I think. But in the meantime, Trump is advising the State Department: do not issue any passports to children who are born here of illegal aliens, because they could be deported tomorrow, and a lot of them are being
Yeah,
so deported. We could talk about that. Um,
yeah.
but that's basically the argument in a nutshell. So, it's hard to predict how this case will go, but it's not so uh, blatantly unconstitutional as one judge said, in a 2 cents opinion without even analyzing it. So there's a lot to
Well,
be looked at here in this case.
yeah, and there's several follow-ups that I want to ask on that. With
Sure.
respect to allegiance, you talked about allegiance, and whether or not somebody who comes to this country has no allegiance to the United States, just as their baby here is that baby
Mm.
therefore under subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore a legal citizen. Who and how do we find allegiance? Because what if somebody says, "No, you're right. I'm not a citizen, but I want to be. I will pledge my allegiance to your flag, to your country. This is where I want to be. I have my baby here on your soil. I am allegiant to this country. This is what I want to be. This is where I want to be." What does allegiance mean in legal parlance?
Yeah, well, basically, what in that particular example you give is fine. You want to apply for citizenship and be a naturalized citizen as opposed to a birthright citizen, get at the end of the line. But don't jump the line and come here illegally and say, okay, now I want to apply for citizenship. So that's why, they can. at this point, they don't owe their allegiance to the United States. They may want to, and there are examples where even some illegal aliens here are actually in the armed forces, and then their Congress passes a law saying, okay, because you showed your faithfulness to the United States by serving here in their armed forces, we're going to say that you can get American and U.S. citizenship. So there's case by case examples of how that can happen. But
Does
the
that work
14th
for you? Is that a good enough show of allegiance that I actually wore the badge, or not the badge, wore the flag on my sleeve, picked up a gun, and I'm ready to go?
Well, I think it shows their intent follow the laws. But the thing is that they still can't just automatically get U.S. citizenship. They have to go through the process. But I think
No, not
this
them,
whole
but their child. No, not them, but their child. So, like,
yeah,
let's say, two illegal aliens from Mexico, or pick a place, doesn't matter, but they come
right,
to the United States, and they are illegal. They came here in between ports of entry. They came here illegally, and they want to serve in the military to show their allegiance, or at least
yeah,
one of them does anyway. And then they have a child while on American soil. Now we're
yeah.
saying that child is not a citizen just because they were born here, because they don't owe an allegiance to the United States.
Well,
If
yeah,
mom or
it's
dad is
not.
in the service, does that change it?
Well, it may change it, but only if that illegal alien themselves become a naturalized citizen, and then therefore their children can be. So, I mean,
Okay.
that's kind of a rare example. I think there may be some play in the joints here and how that can play out. But the word allegiance, I don't want to put too much weight into it. But it's basically, are you subject to what's called the complete jurisdiction
Jurisdiction.
of the
Right.
country that you're in? And of course, when you become a citizen, you take an oath to defend and support the Constitution of the United States, and that's when you show your true allegiance. But
Right.
there are examples of illegal aliens who are in the military
Mhm.
who somehow got in, and then Congress, on a case by case basis, can have what's called a special law just for that small category.
Right. Okay.
All right.
President Trump has said on a number of occasions, no other nation in the world has ever had such a thing. Is that true? Or are we the only ones that actually ever had birthright citizenship?
No, no, that's not true. The countries that have birthright citizenship, uh, the Latin term for that is "jus soli," meaning jurisdiction of the land that you're born on, uh,
Mhm.
as opposed to "jus sanguinis," meaning the citizenship of your parents. So, United States has birthright citizenship, but it's an American version. It's qualified. Other countries, I think in South America, and I think even in Canada, has a more broader interpretation that if you're born in that country, you are automatically a citizen, no questions asked. Now in Europe, they used to have that, but a lot of the European countries, if not most of them, have done away with that. I think, for example, Ireland in 2008 did away with that. So most of our European allies and countries don't have this birthright citizenship. They have it by citizenship based on your parents, either your mother or your father or both. So he's not correct in saying that we are the only country that has it. So there are other countries that have it, but he's
Okay.
at least trying to, uh, trim back the abuse of it because it's basically a magnet
Yeah.
for
It is
illegal
totally
aliens.
okay. And that's the reason. I was gonna, you nailed it, because it is a magnet, and that's why he wants to do this. Obviously, this is very important, and I'm curious. And by the way, it's just funny when you talk about Ireland. So for a while there, anyway, two Chinese people could be visiting Ireland, have a baby there, and that baby, who looks and speaks and is Chinese, but actually gets to say technically, "I'm Irish. I'm an
Well, it
Irish
used to be,
person
but
because I
not
was
that way.
born."
They
That's
they
what I mean.
changed that. Yeah,
And a lot of European nations did, which you just pointed out, and
right.
which is why what I certainly hope we were
I
able to
see. Yeah.
follow. But I'm curious, Paul, as to why President Trump waited until term two to do this. The border and cutting down on the illegal flow of drugs and human beings and everything else trafficking into the country was the centerpiece of this first run for office. In fact, I'm going to build a big beautiful wall to keep all these people out. I'm curious, why now? Why did birthright citizenship go unaddressed for the first 4 years? I mean, it's
Yeah.
speculation, but what do you
Well, I don't know how to answer that. I know he had a lot of other things on his plate, and maybe because at the time he was in, he was having an effective control of the border, and therefore this was not such a big magnet. But then once Biden got in there and opened up the borders, he goes, "Oh, geez, I better put that on the top of my agenda because Biden now opened the border. Now I've got that problem to deal with, not only sealing the border." Which he's doing and deporting illegal aliens, as we know, but also attending to this. But this argument has been, basically talked about by academics and so forth over the years. So this is really nothing new, but I think the time has come for it to be
I
put
agree.
into effect.
Yeah, and the pejorative term for it is anchor babies. People wanting to come
Yeah.
here when it's a magnet to come here and drop anchor. Wow, that's
Yep.
my child is an American citizen. You can't make us leave too and separate our family. I mean, how
Right.
how loathsome are you that you would do such a thing? And so the baby's anchored here, and so therefore are the parents. Um, I know you're not specifically an immigration attorney, so I hate hammering you with all these things, but let's try to work our way through the legality of the deportation proceedings. President Trump came in saying, not only are we going to seal the border, and by the way, in the first 3 weeks or so of his presidency, at the time of our chatting, I think the number was a 94% decrease in encounters at the border since
Yeah.
President Trump took over. 94%. That's simply
Yeah.
astounding. And he didn't need some $1 trillion act of Congress to make that happen, which is what the last president said you had to have that bipartisan border security bill that was going to need to spend $1 trillion and allow 5,000 illegals a day, and then we can seal the border and all that garbage. But the deportation task force is the other part of this. And they
Yep.
have said very clearly this is about the worst first. We're going to go after the worst, the gang members, the international, transnational gang members, the cartel members, the human traffickers, the fentanyl runners, and all of these kinds of things. These are the people we're going to go after first. But then if we're sweeping them, and we run into you, and you are also, maybe you're not one of them, but you are also here illegally, you're gone too. And people are
Right.
saying they can't do that. So I want your explanation, as much as you can give it again, on asylum law. If some of these people are here claiming asylum, I'm seeking asylum because I'm being persecuted in my own country. I know President Trump is going to reinstitute the Remain in Mexico policy, which he did
Right.
the first time around to great success. But what about those who have already been granted asylum here in the United States and told under catch and release that you can stay? What's the legality of grabbing them and saying, nope, and then secondly, what is TPS, Paul? Temporary protected status was granted to a lot of
Mhm.
illegal immigrants, including some here in Ohio and that whole Springfield mess, the
Right.
Haitian migrants. Were given TPS. Are they illegal aliens or are they not illegal aliens? Should they
Yeah.
be subject to deportation or should they not be? This all gets very confusing.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I am not an immigration attorney, but from what I can understand how this works, those, as you said, the hypothetical who have been granted asylum already, I think they're protected. But what we have here is a lot of them have not been granted asylum. They've only applied for asylum, and therefore they haven't gone through the process. And the process is basically taking years and years and years. So they said, okay, we got your asylum application, but you can stay here. In the meantime, I think for those, it could very well be.
That's what I meant when I said granted asylum, meaning we've caught you and you're claiming asylum, so you're free to stay. We've given you the permission to stay while you await your actual asylum hearing. So technically,
Yeah.
they've been granted
Okay.
asylum at least temporarily.
Right. So if they got their paperwork in and they said, okay, we're going to what they call parole you within the United States, come back in 10 years, wink, wink, and then we'll look at your asylum application. Uh, those cases, I'm not sure how legally they can be deported. It could be that they could be deported, but their asylum application is still pending. So they can come back in the 10 years when their asylum case is being heard, or maybe put somewhere else within U.S. territory. I'm not sure how that
Or
would
even
work.
just in Mexico, with the Remain in Mexico policy being
Sure.
instituted anybody who does this now claiming asylum,
Oh
fine. You're
yeah,
claiming asylum. You came through Mexico, hang out there for a while. We'll come and get you in a few years for your hearing. But
yeah,
can somebody who's already been granted that parole, can they be pushed not back to their home country, but just the
yeah.
one
But
you
back in
came through? It's
Mexico,
Mexico.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a good point that you're making, and I think that that's possible. But I think this administration is more concerned about getting the bad guys out of here, and instead of those who are making legitimate claims for asylum. Although in most cases, those asylum applications, I think like 90% are denied because you
illegitimate.
have to really show a well-grounded fear that you're going to be killed or whatever back in your home country, et cetera. It's a very hard standard to make, and that provision, can be adjusted by the executive branch. But you mentioned something similar to that, and that's the TPS, temporary protective status, especially of these Haitian immigrants there in Springfield, Ohio. Now that was one where, as I understand it, Biden basically waved a magic wand and said, "You are hereby given TPS." Again, since that's an executive function, I think Trump can wave his magic wand and say, that TPS protection no longer applies. And that, of course, will be one where the courts will have to litigate that as well. So all these are interesting questions, but those are issues I think at the margin. I think the larger issue is the issue of, getting these illegal immigrants out, sanctuary cities where you're having governors of California and New York, Kathy Hochul, saying, we're not going to cooperate with ICE, and they're treading on thin ice there because if they are affirmatively blocking the deportation by not cooperating with ICE agents, they can be prosecuted themselves for obstructing justice in this regard, and it can go as far. I mean, I think I saw something just a couple days ago where Congressman Ilhan Omar, or Omar Ilhan, uh, was at a town hall of illegal Muslim immigrants, and she was telling them in her native language, and it was translated that, hey, if an ICE agent comes up to you, tell them that your attorney says you don't have to talk to them, and just don't tell them anything. Well, I said to myself, wait a minute, did she just tell these illegal aliens to lie to ICE agents, saying that they were told by an attorney not to talk to them? That in of itself is a crime to lie to federal agents. So in a way, this congresswoman is aiding and abetting people to evade deportation.
She made it very clear a couple of years ago. She said she's here to advocate for Somalia from within the United States. She
Oh yeah,
talk about having allegiance. She has allegiance to her
right.
native-born country more than she does the one that she is serving in the government of. It's crazy to
Amen,
think that
brother. On that, you're
she
right.
literally said that. So last thing on this, because and again, keep the immigration attorney's hat on, even though you may not practice it
All
regularly.
right.
Um, the difference between a civil and a criminal violation,
Yeah.
because just the presence of an illegal, this has been discussed and debated, and I have had lawyers on who have said it up one side and down the other, different with different points of view on this. Um, most of the people on the left say it's not against the law to be here illegally. It's a civil violation. It's not a crime per se. Tom Holman, who's in charge of this whole thing, continues to cite 8 U.S. Code 1325, which reads, and I pulled it up, any alien who enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place other than as designated by immigration officers, or two, eludes examination or inspection by immigration officers, or three, attempts to enter or obtains entry to the United States by a willfully false or misleading representation, or the willful concealment of a material fact, shall, for the first commission of any such offense, be fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 6 months or both, and for any subsequent commission, fined under U.S. Title 18, or I'm sorry, under Title 18 and in prison not more than 2 years or both.
Yeah.
And then it goes into civil penalties. Any alien who's apprehended while entering or attempting to enter uh, in a time or place other than designated by immigration officers shall be subject to a penalty of $50. And that's it, and not more than 250 for any subsequent entries. So, what are we talking about here? Why is it so confusing? Is it criminal or is it civil, or how can it be both?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you read the language clear, and it clearly is criminal. It's a misdemeanor, subject to 6 months in prison. Anything under a year is generally considered a misdemeanor. So it is a criminal, but almost a lot of our laws have both criminal and civil penalties associated with them. So it's up to the government to decide which of those penalties they want to impose. So it could be both criminal and civil. There could be both being levied against the person. But the bottom line is whether it's criminal or civil, they're illegally here and can be deported. No question about it. So that's the main issue, as opposed to, gee, is it only a civil violation? Is it criminal? Who cares? You're illegal. You're deportable. End of story.
Okay. Let's pivot off of the immigration stuff, even though a lot of that is extraordinarily important right
Sure.
now. I want to ask you about a couple of other things, including the legality of discrimination based on race or other immutable characteristics. Now, I
Sure.
phrase it that way rather than the way the left likes to phrase it, which is DEI. It's supporting diversity and inclusion and equity among hiring or among entry into a class. You know, if you're applying for a spot in a university or college, but if for every inclusion and equity and diversity hire or appointment, there is somebody who got discriminated against, which is illegal. I mean, as far as I understand the Civil Rights Act, you cannot be discriminated against because of your immutable characteristics, your race or your sex, etc. That's what the Civil Rights Act was for. It wasn't only for people who are minorities. No one can be discriminated on that basis. So with President Trump writing another executive order calling for an end to all DEI policies among federal government, federal agencies,
Right.
contractors, and so on and so forth. Isn't all he's doing is reverting back to what the Civil Rights Act says? You cannot discriminate against people, even if your intent is to discriminate into the benefit or for the benefit of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed right on the head there. So basically, DEI, sounds kind of nice. Diversity, equity, inclusion. How could you be against that? Well, the point is that the word equity, especially, shows that it's not equality, which is what we're supposed to be treated under our laws, but equity, basically, is code word for we want a kind of equal results, not equal opportunity. And that's where a lot of these DEI policies run afoul of the basic understanding of our civil rights laws. And that was most recently ruled by the Supreme Court a year or so ago in the Harvard University case, where the court ruled that the admissions of students where the university places their thumb on the scale for a preference of diversity in terms of the immutable characteristics, like you said, their race, their ethnic background, etc. The court said no, that's basically discrimination. You're supposed to be colorblind, and that's what equality is all about. So Trump is exactly right to eliminate these DEI programs throughout the federal government, and we see that now going into not only academia, they're starting to eliminate it there. There's some holdouts, of course, but now down to the corporate communities, the businesses, where they're
Yeah.
starting to get rid of DI. In fact, our organization that I'm counsel to, the National Legal and Policy Center, if you go to our website, nlpc.org, you'll see all the good stuff we're doing going after these woke corporations because we own stock in a lot of these major corporations. And because of that, we're able to attend annual shareholder meetings and make shareholder proposals that tell these companies to do away with these DEI programs. And they have them disguised in many cases in different ways, or they'll in a lot of cases, they peg their executive pay bonuses on how well these executives promote DEI. And we say, no, get rid of that too. Now, a lot of them are cutting back. McDonald's said they're cutting back, but they were just caught a couple of weeks ago where they had a scholarship program that only if you're Hispanic you can apply for it. Well, the same people that sued Harvard University and the Supreme Court filed a suit in Chicago against McDonald's a couple weeks ago, and McDonald's said, "Oops, you caught us. We'll now leave this scholarship program open to everybody." Well, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's good that this DEI is being eliminated not only in the federal government but also at state levels as well. I'd like to see what the governor of Indiana did, Republican governor. He says, "I'm getting rid of DEI. I'm now going to have MEI, merit, excellence, and innovation. MEI." I go, "Now that's the
Love it.
way to do it." So
That is
we'll
the way
see.
that's how you should be doing it. When my
Right.
daughter was applying for colleges in 2019, exceptional student. She may come to work for you someday. She's a law student right now.
Great.
Um, anyway, when she was applying for colleges and I was helping look for scholarship money for her, I
Right.
was astounded at the. I mean, she was a 4.4 student. She was a 34 ACT. I mean, she checked all of the
Wow.
boxes, had volunteerism, had, I mean, just all of the things that you look for. And the number of scholarships that we applied for her, or excuse me, that we tried to apply where she was not allowed to even submit an
Yes.
application for because she wasn't the right color or
Right.
the right ethnicity or one immutable characteristic or another. All of these things are out there, and I'm thinking
Totally
to myself,
illegal.
this is legitimately racial discrimination. I
Yeah.
mean, fortunately, she took care of business in the ones that she could, and she got some really wonderful
Good. Good
scholarship.
for
But
her.
the point is, why would somebody like her, if not her, somebody like her, or anybody else for that matter, I'll go another direction since you brought up the corporate thing. You mentioned McDonald's. I think there's a big long list now. John Deere and
Sure.
a lot of a lot of manufacturers. Large manufacturers have completely scrapped their DEI programs. But one notable one in the last few weeks or so that says we're not is Costco.
Yep.
And the 85-year-old former CEO, I think he was CEO, he was a big wig at Costco,
Uh-huh.
did an interview and said, well, we've never been DEI, but we've always just done the right thing and we treat everybody the right way. And in the course of describing how they're not DEI, he said, so what we've always done is, if there's two people that are equally qualified and one is minority and the other one is not, we're going to give the one an opportunity that he might not get anywhere else. And I'm thinking to myself, Paul, these people not, you just described DEI. You just told the non-minority you don't get the job that you're equally qualified for because we're going to give it to somebody else based on his color. And it may be great for
Right.
that guy, but it's not so great for the guy who didn't get the job or the promotion or whatever. It is the very definition of DEI and
Right.
discrimination, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's kind of hard to say, well, are they equally qualified? Because I think in a lot of those cases, they say they're equally qualified, but the one is not. And if it was truly equally qualified, which is, I don't know how that can be determined, then flip a coin. That way you're not
Right.
discriminating against one or the other.
That's exactly what I mean. And what is the equally qualified? They both are high school graduates, but don't have any college, or both have 1 year
Right.
of college, whatever it might be. Each was hired on the same day, and so they're up for a promotion. So they both have the same level of experience. I mean, then like you said, flip a coin, but do not tell one you get the job because you look this way, and you don't get the job because you look
Yeah.
different.
Sure.
That's just an insane thing for me.
Yeah.
Uh, I want to kind of wander into your wheelhouse here for a moment here and ask you about one other federal I don't know if it's policy, but it's what President Trump has ordered and something he said he was going to do right when he was inaugurated, and that is he was going to reclaim control of and therefore control the profits from the use of the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
You have an interesting experience here that you can talk about here. Tell us about that and whether or not this is something that, why hasn't any president done this since Carter? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, what you're referring to is a lawsuit that I brought many years ago against Jimmy Carter on behalf of some 40 members of Congress challenging the legality of the Panama Canal Treaty. Now, quick lesson on treaty law. There are two kinds of treaties. There's self-executing treaties, meaning that they can come into being and they can be effective on their own terms. And there's non-self-executing treaties, meaning they need an act of Congress to implement those treaties. So what happened with the Panama Canal, Jimmy Carter said, Panama, you want all this equipment that we own, these railroad tracks, these barges, this equipment, and this land, Panama Canal. Here, you can have it. And we said, okay, you may be able to have a treaty that says that, but you cannot implement it until Congress authorizes it, because under the Constitution, Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 clearly says that Congress has the power to dispose of all U.S. property. So we're saying, hey, the treaty's fine as it is, but you can't implement it until Congress does pass a law signed by the president that says this property can be given away. And we argued that here in the federal court here in D.C. I went to the Court of Appeals. A three-judge court ruled against me. However, one judge wrote like a 60-page opinion dissenting, saying, of course Congress has to do that. Otherwise, a president could have a treaty that says, hey, foreign country, you want 1,000 of our ships or airplanes? Sure, here's a treaty, you can have it. You go, wait a minute, you're disposing of U.S. property. Only Congress can do that. So I went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court denied review, meaning they never looked at it. They said, we're not going to look at that issue. So technically speaking, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled on it. Now, can Trump raise this again? I don't think so. I hope at least he talks about it, because under international law, the general rule is once the treaty has now been implemented, not by Congress, but by international agreement, then it's as good as gold, so to speak, even though domestically you screwed up in terms of having the law effectuated. And I did the same thing, by the way, when we sued Jimmy Carter over terminating our mutual defense treaty with Taiwan back in the day. What happened was Jimmy Carter woke up one day and said, I hereby terminate our defense treaty with Taiwan. And we go, wait a minute, you can't do that unilaterally. And why is that? We had Senator Goldwater as a client who said, I voted for this mutual defense treaty with Taiwan. I was one of the senators. You can't undo a treaty without having the Senate involved. So we argued that. It did go to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, gee, nice try, but we're going to rule that we're not going to rule. They basically said it's a hot potato, it's a political question. We'll let the two branches of government, the executive branch and the Congress, duke it out. So it leaves unclear whether a president can wake up one morning on the wrong side of the bed and tear up a treaty. I mean, hey, if this is the law, can Trump wake up one morning and say, I hereby tear up the NATO treaty? Well, he may be able to do that based on the precedent that we have with the mutual defense treaty. But anyway,
What's the difference
I
between a treaty and an accord? Because basically did that with the Paris Climate Accords twice now.
Right, right, exactly. The accord is an executive agreement, and those can be done unilaterally by the president. You're exactly right. A treaty, however, is made with the Senate involved, and we argued, at least with the defense treaty, you couldn't do that unilaterally, but the court didn't look at it. So, but you're right. The Paris Accord, getting out of the World Health Organization, all these things is clearly within the presidential prerogative, especially under foreign affairs power that he has. And that's where, by the way, that argument's being made when they're challenging his shutting down USAID with all the waste that goes on there. The other side is saying, wait a minute, Congress had all this money that we appropriated that should be spent for all these frivolous programs. And he's arguing, not so fast. I've got some power because USAID affects our foreign affairs. And the Supreme Court has said in many, many cases that the president has a lot of power in how to deal with foreign affairs. So you can't have Congress pass a law saying, hey, give this $5 million to this terrorist group in Somalia. What? I'm not going to give that money. That's against U.S. interests. Well, we're Congress. You got to do it. No way.
Yeah.
So that's just
Yeah.
one, kind of a
That's why the people
hypothetical.
vote for their president, and I know they vote for the
Exactly.
members of Congress too, but they give the president a lot of power and a lot of latitude when it comes to this. In
Right.
fact, two things because I don't want to forget. I want to go back to the reason. Did they give you a reason, the Supreme Court, why they said we're not going to take up that issue when you first brought that case?
Of the
They said
Panama
they're not even
Canal
they're
case,
not even talking about it. Yeah,
Panama Canal case, no, they simply just one sentence,
so
certiorari
they don't
denied.
have to say why.
No, they
This
don't
is
have
why
to
you
say
have
why,
standing, and
and
there's no.
no, they don't.
Okay, that's got to be extraordinarily frustrating when
Right,
you bring
right.
an
It is,
action
but
like
now
that.
going back to what Trump is doing, it is even in the treaty. There's actually a provision says that the United States retains the unilateral right to use military force to make sure that the canal stays open. So there is even authority in there about the use of military force. Now, will Trump invoke that clause or try to he maybe will try to use it to bargain with Panama? Because as we know, there are these Chinese companies there through Hong Kong that have control of two of the ports there that risk national security if they could close that canal to both our U.S. warships as well as trade. So I think, as we know, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was there on his first trip to Panama, and he was basically talking about the national security interest that the United States has down there. So stay tuned in terms of how we can exercise the leverage we have there because Trump is right. We basically gave this away. We lost 36,000 lives building the canal back in the 30s and so forth. It's something that is of uh, national security importance to the United States, and we can't basically turn a blind eye to it.
We're coming up on the end of our hour, Paul, but
Okay.
so this is kind of perfect, actually, a perfect full circle. We started talking about the authority of federal judges to stop the president from implementing all kinds of executive orders. And since you just brought up USAID, it kind of does bring us back to that again.
Yeah.
um, the argument that they're making to these judges, and some of these judges who I think indeed have been shopped for, is that Congress gets to decide where this money is spent. In Congress, we approve this money for that, and so forth. How dare you, Trump? But isn't again the same party that is trying to allege this now and getting judges to essentially enjoin
Hmm.
these case or these orders by President
Right.
Trump? Didn't Congress approve a certain amount of money to build a wall that Joe Biden came in and unilaterally, executively said we're killing the wall?
Yeah.
Didn't I mean, right? This is what we're talking about here.
Great.
Congress approved a lot of money for a lot of things that Joe Biden, when he took office, and by the stroke of his executive pen on January 20th, 2017, or I'm sorry, 2021. He immediately revoked and said, "No, we're not spending that money on that." And now the same party that represented that is screaming that Trump isn't spending the money on foreign interests, USAID, the way
Yeah.
they want him to. I'm trying to find some
All right.
consistency here, Paul, and I
Yeah.
can't find it.
Well, no, you won't find it. I mean, it's very hypocritical. You're right that the money was supposed to spend to build the wall, and Biden didn't do that, and now we find out that they were actually selling pieces of the wall for what 5 cents on the dollar as
Yeah,
scrap metal, etc. Trump put a hold on that. The larger legal issue that the other side is arguing is that the president cannot. Direct where this money goes under what's called the Impoundment Control Act of 1976. And the issue is whether, even though Congress authorizes and appropriates the money, does the president have the power to decide whether to spend it on the things that Congress said that the president should spend it? And there, I think this is a good issue being litigated because, like I said earlier, with respect to foreign affairs, the president has wide power on that. Presidents in the past have used their powers to impound some of this spending because they also have the power to take care that the laws are faithfully executed in terms of if they can, in other words, let's say Congress says, here's $1 million to buy a tank. And the president says, well, I can buy the tank for half that. Oh, I'm sorry, you got to spend $1 million for that one tank. No, that's wasteful spending. And that's what Doge is all about, going
Yeah.
after all this wasteful spending and trying to withhold payments on that. So I think this issue ultimately we go to the Supreme Court, and there's a great legal argument that the Empowerment Control Act itself is unconstitutional in terms of how it basically puts the handcuffs on the president to be the steward of how this money should be spent. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah. What's your gut tell you with respect to the Supreme Court on birthright citizenship? Just to come back to one of the first things
Yeah,
you
no,
talked
that's a
about.
good
Going to
example.
get there
Good.
eventually.
It'll get there, no doubt about it, and it may get there sooner than we think. Normally, this case takes months and months to go up, but I think this case will go up in a matter of 3 or 4 weeks, perhaps, and leapfrog straight to the Supreme Court, uh, because the birthright citizenship order itself is supposed to kick in 30 days after it was signed. So February 20th, I think, is the start date for it. So it'll go up quickly. I not sure how this is going to play out. I think if the court, I think there's probably 5 votes in favor of upholding Trump's executive order. There are those who even think that he's right on that, that the court itself may not want to, uh, reverse what was been the understanding for the last 100 years of birthright citizenship. But look, they reversed Roe versus Wade, even though they did it, and they also reversed Plessy versus Ferguson, the 1898 law, constitutional law decision that said separate but equal is constitutional. No, we had Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 said no, separate but equal is not constitutional. So, stay tuned. But I think, actually, I may predict that there's a way that the court may split the baby, no pun intended, in this way. They may say that birth tourism, that can be eliminated. In other words, if somebody comes in here on a boat, docks in Miami, has a baby, goes back home, it's clear in that case that person doesn't owe their allegiance to the United States and that a baby shouldn't be a U.S. citizen. For those that have been here for many years, perhaps they're working, they're paying taxes and all that. That may be a different argument. They may say, well, no, those people have birthright citizenship. It's kind of like splitting the baby in two, like I said, no pun intended. But that's one way the court could rule. But it's either going to be all or nothing, I think, as at the end of the day.
Yeah. And then, I can't figure it out with this court. It's not as conservative or as originalist as people think,
Yeah, you're
because
right.
quite frankly, all of the Trump appointees have made me scratch my head at various points in time, going, "That's not what I thought we got there in that, in
Yeah.
that appointment." And then John Roberts is a wild card every
Oh
single
yeah.
time.
And
So I
Amy
never know
Coney
what to expect.
Barrett too goes with the liberals sometimes. So
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, all three of them, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Barrett, have
yeah,
all, it's made me just kind of wonder what in the world that was all about. And so I don't really know. Oh, here's the irony about this, Paul, as we wrap it up, too.
yeah,
Typically, I don't like referring to justices as being conservative or liberal based on their appointment,
yeah,
who they're appointed by. I like to see it as originalist versus activist because I
yeah,
really feel like the conservative-minded justices that are appointed are just saying, no, we're not changing with the times and making the Constitution a malleable document where it's originalist thinking, and the
yeah.
activists want to do whatever they want with it. But it's interesting, and this time we are talking about a constitutional amendment. We are talking about the 14th Amendment that
Right,
we would be asking the quote unquote originalists to revoke and say, yeah, that one doesn't really apply anymore because of birth tourism. So
right.
therefore, so we're asking the conservative originalists to be a little bit activist here in removing this one if that's the way that it comes down. So that's just
Right. That's one way to
irony.
look at it. And the other thing that the liberals always say, well, you conservatives, you're activists when your decisions and Roe v. Wade and all that. I go, no, no, no. What they're doing is deactivating your activist ruling. They're not being activists on their own because they want to have their own agenda. They're going back to originalist understanding of the Constitution, and they are deactivating the activist rulings of the prior courts.
That is the best way to close our conversation. I like that. I'm going to use that too. That's exactly what the opposite of being an activist is deactivating.
Right.
Paul Kamenar, thank you. Really appreciate the conversation.
You
Great
bet.
information. And thanks so much. We'll chat again.
You bet. My pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode of Strictly Speaking, make sure that you share it. Make sure if you're watching it on Rumble or on YouTube or listening on Spotify that you give us a like. And also make sure that you click the subscribe button so you can be notified for future episodes. Thanks for watching Strictly Speaking. See you next time.